In April of 1812, a severed head sat inside an iron cage, mounted above a street in Havana. Underneath it was the house where its owner had lived. Spanish authorities put it there on purpose, for everyone walking past to see. They wanted it to be the end of a story. It became the beginning of one instead, because 200 years later, Cuba's own government would put that man's name on a national commission. Tonight, who was in that cage, what he spent years painting in secret before anyone caught him, and why the people who killed him couldn't actually make him disappear. Keep this image in mind. We'll come back to it in 9 minutes. Rewind 50 years. Around 1760 in Havana, a boy named Jose Antonio Aponte was born free, a legal status that mattered enormously in a Spanish colony built on slavery, and one his family had held for 3 generations. His grandfather had spent 43 years as a captain in Havana's free black militia. That militia was real, armed, uniformed, trusted enough to help put down disorder. Aponte grew into the same world, corporal in that same militia and by trade, a carpenter and sculptor good enough to be hired by churches to carve religious statues. He was also, by every account, relentlessly self-taught. He kept a small personal library, Aesop's Fables, a guide to Rome, histories of Ethiopia, at a time when literacy among free black Cubans was rare and books were expensive. And for years, alongside the woodwork, he was making something else, a book of his own, not written. Painted? We know almost nothing about that book firsthand because it no longer exists. Spanish investigators seized it, interrogated Aponte about every page, and then it vanished from the historical record entirely. Everything we know about it comes from his own testimony, forced out of him under trial. So what follows is a reconstruction, informed guesswork, built directly from that testimony, of pages nobody alive has actually seen in 214 years. Trial records say one page showed Greek and Roman gods standing next to something else entirely. Was it A, Aztec temples, B, black men depicted as emperors and priests, or C, Napoleon's coronation? It's B, black men depicted as emperors and priests. Another page was a portrait of a real historical figure, a head of state. Was it A, Charles IV of Spain, B, Toussaint Louverture, or C, George Washington? It's C, George Washington. And the page that worried his prosecutors most, was it a harbor defense map, B, black soldiers defeating white soldiers, or C, a slave auction? It's B again, black soldiers defeating white soldiers in battle, maps of Havana's own garrisons, sketches of his father and grandfather in their militia uniforms next to African kings who never wore one, a private, illustrated argument that the world could be arranged differently than it was. For years, it stayed a private argument. Then Haiti happened. A few hundred miles east, the French colony of Saint-Domingue had just finished the only successful slave revolution in modern history. Enslaved people had beaten Napoleon's army and founded Haiti, a black-led republic, in the same hemisphere in Aponte's own lifetime. To colonial planters across the Caribbean, Haiti was the nightmare they built their whole security apparatus around. To Aponte, it was proof of concept. By 1812, Aponte had moved from painting an alternate world to organizing one. The plan was not a single midnight uprising in one city. It was coordinated, multi-city, built to move on the same signal. Burn the sugar plantations ringing Havana, seize the armories inside the capital, and rise at the same time in Puerto Príncipe, in Bayamo, in Holguin. Somewhere around 400 men were pulled into it, free and enslaved, black and mixed race, urban artisans and rural field workers, a coalition that colonial Cuba's entire racial hierarchy was designed to prevent from ever forming. Of those four coordinated risings, was it A, all four, B, two, or C, none? How many actually got underway before being stopped? It's B2. Plantations did burn and people did die in Havana and Puerto Príncipe. The Bayamo and Holguin conspirators were arrested before they could act. It was real. It was not small. And it was betrayed before it could finish. Someone talked. We don't know who, with certainty. The record is thin on that one detail, maybe deliberately. What we do know is that colonial authorities moved fast once they had a name, and the name they had was Aponte. He was tried in March of 1812, alongside 8 others. 5 of the 9 were free men, and that detail terrified the plantation class more than almost anything else in the case. Free black militiamen were supposed to be the guarantee against exactly this kind of uprising. Aponte had been one of them. If the guarantee could organize the threat, the entire system Spain had built to police slavery in Cuba had a hole in it that couldn't be patched with more chains, only with a public enough punishment that no one else would try. On the morning of April 9th, 1812, Aponte and his 8 co-defendants were hanged outside the Castillo San Salvador de la Punta, on Havana's harbor mouth. That, by the standards of the time and place, was not unusual. What happened next was the message. His head was removed and sealed inside an iron cage, then mounted above the street outside the house where he had lived. His hand was nailed up on a different street entirely, blocks away. Both stayed on public display, not for a day, for a warning that was meant to last. 19th century Cuba turned his name into an insult. If something had gone badly wrong, if someone had overreached and paid for it, the saying was that they'd been worse than Aponte. That was supposed to be the last word. It wasn't. Decades later, the Cuban anthropologist Fernando Ortiz, the man who essentially founded the serious academic study of Afro-Cuban culture, went back to the record and reframed the whole case. Not a footnote about a dangerous criminal, but early evidence of enslaved and free black Cubans organizing a coherent, ideological fight for freedom, with its own intellectual output, years before it became fashionable for historians to take that seriously. In 2009, Cuba's National Commission Against Racism and Discrimination was renamed the Commission José Antonio Aponte. In 2012, exactly 200 years after his execution, his bicentennial was formally marked, and he was reclaimed as a founding figure of Cuban resistance, not a warning story. The empire that put his head in a cage to make sure no one remembered him spent 2 centuries failing to make that stick, and then lost the argument permanently in his own country under his own name. 214 years later, nobody has ever seen the pages of that book. We just showed you our best guess at a few of them. Somewhere, that's either a tragedy or a dare. Which of these actually happened? Stick around for the quiz on screen right now, and tell me in the comments which detail surprised you most.